She was refilling his wine glass when he decided she was the funniest thing in the room. The cameras were already rolling. 300,000 people were watching live. Kenji Sato, Japan's most celebrated tech billionaire, the man the financial press called the god of growth, turned to his guest, then turned to the lens, then pointed at the woman standing quietly beside his table in a black uniform and a red apron. He was laughing before he even finished the sentence. "Tell me," he said, loud enough for every microphone in the room to catch it, "what would a waitress do with $1 million?" The studio audience chuckled. His guest raised his glass. Kenji leaned back in his chair, basking in it. The lights, the laughter, the absolute certainty that nothing in this room could touch him. He had no idea what he had just handed her. Because she didn't flinch. She didn't smile politely and move on. She set the wine bottle down on his table with a sound so quiet it somehow silenced everything. She looked directly into the broadcast camera, and in perfect, unhurried Japanese, she told him exactly where his $500 million had gone, and who had taken it. The laughter stopped like a switch had been flipped. This is the story of the woman Kenji Sato thought was invisible. He was the last person in the room to understand his mistake. Stay with me. Because what happens next will rearrange everything you think you know about power and who actually holds it. But before we get into what happened next, and why that one sentence made a billionaire's entire empire start collapsing live on camera, take a second to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy stories where power gets challenged, secrets come to light, and the people everyone overlooks turn out to be the ones who change everything, you're in the right place. Now let's go back to that moment. Because when the waitress finished speaking, the room didn't just go quiet. Someone in the control booth stopped the broadcast. Let me tell you about Aiko. She was 29 years old, Black British, fluent in Japanese, Mandarin, and the precise, unforgiving language of financial fraud. On the night Kenji Sato pointed at her, she had been working the dining floor of Kurosawa Sky, Tokyo's most exclusive private restaurant, 70 floors above the city, for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. She knew the exact count because she had been counting down. This was not the life she was supposed to have. 4 years before that night, Aiko had been someone the financial world watched carefully. The youngest senior analyst ever placed at Meridian Capital Partners in London, a woman who had designed a risk modeling system so sophisticated it became the quiet engine behind some of the most profitable sovereign wealth decisions of the decade. She didn't just understand money, she understood the architecture beneath it. The invisible structures that determined whether a billion-dollar deal would stand or collapse, and exactly when. Her mentor saw that gift, cultivated it, used it. His name was Haruto Dazai. He was charming in the particular way of men who have spent their entire careers making other people feel chosen. He told Aiko she was exceptional. He told her the industry wasn't ready for someone like her, but that he was. He said he would make sure the world eventually caught up. What he actually did was steal her work, restructure it as a $500 million fraud, and hand her name to regulators when the first cracks appeared. She was 25. She had no institutional protection, no powerful friends, and the kind of paper trail that only looks damning if you don't know who actually built it. Dazai had lawyers. He had relationships. He had 30 years of carefully constructed reputation. Aiko had her word. And in that world, at that moment, her word was worth nothing at all. So she ran. Not from guilt, from the clear-eyed understanding that innocence is not the same as safety, and that the truth, without the right platform, dies in a filing cabinet. She came to Tokyo because Tokyo was where Dazai's next operation was taking root. She took the job at Kurosawa Sky because it placed her on the same floor as the private dining room where his deals were made. She learned the floor plan, the guest schedules, The camera positions. She learned which table had the best broadcast sightline. She folded a single printed document, her original 2020 risk model, time-stamped, authored, irrefutable, and placed it in the pocket of every apron she owned. She had been waiting for a room with enough witnesses. Kenji Sato, laughing into a live camera broadcast to 300,000 people, had just given her the largest witness pool of her career. And she set down the wine. She looked into the lens. She began to speak. The red apron hung on the back of her door every morning like a reminder of a decision she had made and never once regretted. Aiko Tanaka's room in Shimokitazawa was small in the way that felt chosen rather than imposed. A single window facing a narrow street, a bed pushed against the wall, 3 shelves holding the only things she had carried out of her previous life. 2 volumes of advanced risk theory, a Japanese grammar workbook so thoroughly annotated it barely resembled a book anymore, and a photograph of her mother standing outside a terraced house in Peckham, squinting into summer sun, laughing at something just off frame. The British passport lived in a drawer she rarely opened. There was no reason to open it. The woman in that photograph, the one with the lanyard and the Canary Wharf skyline, and the expression of someone who still believed the world was essentially fair, no longer required a passport. She no longer existed in any official sense. Aiko Tanaka, server. That was the current version. She was good at it, in the same way she had been good at everything she had ever decided to understand. She had studied the floor of Kurosawa Sky with the same methodical attention she once brought to sovereign debt structures, memorizing table positions, sightlines, the precise weight distribution required to carry a full tray through a crowded room without disturbing a single glass. Precision was precision. The application changed. The discipline did not. Before this, there had been London, Meridian Capital Partners, a glass and steel office in EC2 where she had arrived at 21 as the youngest analyst on the floor, and left 4 years later as the architect of a risk modeling system that had quietly generated returns her firm's partners celebrated at dinners she was never invited to attend. She had not minded that, at the time. She had believed that the work was what mattered, that excellence was its own protection. Haruto Dazai had taught her that. He had also been the one to prove it catastrophically wrong. She had built the model. He had taken it. When the structure fractured and regulators came looking for a name, he had given them hers with the practiced ease of a man disposing of something he had finished using. She had been 25. He had been untouchable. The distance between those two facts was the entire length of her current life. In the pocket of every apron she owned, folded into a rectangle no larger than a playing card, was a single printed page, her original model, time-stamped, authored, the kind of document that only matters in a room large enough to make denial impossible. She was still looking for that room. She thought some mornings that she was getting close. Kenji Sato had built his public image the way he built everything else, with total deliberateness and zero visible effort. His business channel had 4 million subscribers and a production aesthetic that split the difference between financial authority and approachable genius. No teleprompters, no scripted segments, just Kenji at a table, talking about money the way other men talked about sport. Fluently, passionately, so with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been wrong in a way that cost him anything. Tonight's broadcast was billed as a live celebration dinner, the closing stages of a $500 million infrastructure partnership, filmed in real time at Kurosawa Sky because Kenji believed that transparency was a brand asset and private dining rooms were better television than boardrooms. The camera crew had arrived 2 hours before service. Aiko had watched them set up from the service corridor, noting the primary broadcast angle, the position of the lapel microphones, the sight line from table 1 to the lens. She had requested this assignment 5 weeks ago. Her supervisor had been mildly surprised. Table 1 was high pressure. The guests were never easy, and Aiko usually preferred the quieter sections of the floor. She had said she wanted the experience. He had said fine. Kenji arrived at 8 with Luca Ferrante at his side. Ferrante was Italian, somewhere in his mid-40s, now with the particular brand of European elegance that announced itself through what it left out. No jewelry, no visible logos, the kind of suit that required no introduction. He laughed easily and often, and he had been laughing at something Kenji said when Aiko approached the table for the first time, wine in hand, expression calibrated to the precise neutrality the job required. Neither man looked at her. This was normal. This was, in fact, ideal. She poured. She noted the documents arranged beside Kenji's plate. A prospectus, spiral-bound, flagged with color-coded tabs. She did not read it. She did not need to. The name on the cover tab was enough. Nara Logistics Holdings, Cayman Registered Vehicle. Aiko set the bottle down without a tremor. She had written that name herself, in a risk model she built in a London office at 24 years old, for a deal structure she designed from first principles, and never saw credited to her in any document that followed. The Cayman registration, the subsidiary waterfall, the 18-month repayment architecture with the collapse mechanism built into its third tier like a trapdoor. She knew this structure the way you know the grammar of your first language, not because you studied it, but because you invented it. Luca Ferrante laughed again. Kenji reached for his glass. Aiko took a single, quiet breath and returned to the service corridor. She was not ready yet, but she was very, very close. It was Luca Ferrante who laughed first. Kenji had been mid-sentence. Something about market intuition, about the instinct that separated serious investors from the merely educated. When he paused, gestured toward Aiko with the loose generosity of a man performing spontaneity for a camera, and asked his question. The dining room held perhaps 30 guests across 12 tables. The live viewer count in the corner of the broadcast monitor read 318,000 and was climbing. Ferrante's laugh came out fast and bright, the laugh of a man who recognizes a joke at someone else's expense and wants to be seen enjoying it early. Aiko had been waiting 11 months for a room exactly this size. She set the wine bottle on the table. Not quickly, not slowly. With the same economy of motion she brought to everything, the movement of someone who had long ago stopped spending energy on things that didn't matter, so that when something did matter, every resource was available. She looked into the broadcast camera. Not if it's tied to Nara Logistics, she said. Specifically the Cayman vehicle. That structure collapses at month 18. 7 words had been the plan. It became more, because the room didn't stop her. It froze. She kept going. The registered subsidiary routes through 3 holding layers before it reaches the operational entity, she said, her voice unhurried, her Japanese precise and unaccented. The repayment waterfall is designed to appear solvent through month 16. In month 17, the R&D reserve account, which your prospectus values at $200 million, will be reclassified as a liability. By month 18, Nara Logistics files. The debt transfers upward. You absorb it. That is not a risk. That is the mechanism. It was designed to work exactly this way. Kenji's smile did not disappear. It stopped. And it remained on his face the way objects remain in a room after the person who placed them has left. Present, but no longer animated by anything. The comments section, visible on the production monitor behind the camera operator, was moving too fast to read. Ferrante had put down his glass. Aiko reached into her apron pocket and placed the folded document beside the prospectus on the table. The page was soft at the creases, the timestamp visible in the upper right corner. 14th March, 2020. Her name was on it. So was the structure she had just described. drawn in her own notational shorthand, 4 years before the version currently bound in Kenji's spiral-bound prospectus had been written by anyone. Two members of Kenji's security detail moved toward her from the room's perimeter. Aiko did not move. She had not planned to. She had chosen this floor, this table, this camera angle. She was exactly where she had decided to be, and she had not yet said everything she came to say. The live stream ended at 9:47 p.m. One of Kenji's production team, a young man who had the practiced look of someone accustomed to making problems disappear quickly and without explanation, crossed to the camera operator and said 2 words. The broadcast light went dark. The monitor showing the comments section went with it, though not before Aiko registered the number in the viewer counter. 412,000. When whatever had been said in those comments in the preceding 4 minutes existed now in the permanent, unretractable record of the internet, beyond the reach of any production decision made in this room. Kenji understood that. She could see it in the set of his jaw. His security did not touch her. They positioned themselves at either side and moved with her toward the service elevator in a way that was firm without being aggressive. The choreography of people who had been trained to manage situations without creating new ones. Ferrante said something as she passed the table. She didn't look at him. She had not looked at him once all evening, and she saw no reason to begin now. The room on the 68th floor was used for private pre-dinner meetings. A low table, 4 chairs, a wall of glass overlooking the city. Someone had left a water carafe and 2 glasses, as though the evening had always been heading here. Kenji arrived 3 minutes after she did. He closed the door himself. He sat across from her without calling anyone else into the room, which told her something she filed carefully. He wanted to understand before he reacted. That was not a quality she had expected. He looked at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" he said. It was not quite a question. So she told him. All of it, in the same unhurried register she had used at the table. London, Meridian Capital, the model she began building at 21 that became the engine of returns she was never credited for. Haruto Dazai, the way trust, extended in good faith to someone with the power to weaponize it, becomes the sharpest possible instrument of destruction. The regulators, the evidence that had been assembled around her name like a room built specifically to contain her. And the decision to run not because she was guilty, but because she understood, with the cold clarity of someone who had just watched a system work exactly as designed, that innocence and safety were not the same thing. She told him about Tokyo, about the 11 months, about the apron pocket. Kenji did not interrupt, not once. He sat with his hands flat on the table and he listened with the complete, undivided attention of a man recalibrating everything he thought he knew about the evening he was having. When she finished, the city spread out behind him in every direction, indifferent and glittering. He said, "Show me the model." Kenji's encrypted system lived on a device that required 2 separate authentication steps and a third that Aiko suspected was biometric. He moved through the security layers without hesitation, which told her the paranoia was habitual rather than situational. This was a man who had always assumed someone might be watching. The irony of that, given the evening's events, she set aside for later. The full deal file opened across the screen in a column of folders organized by workstream. Legal, financial, technical, due diligence. She asked him to open the financial modeling subfolder. He did. She leaned forward and found it in under 40 seconds. Not because she was searching, but because she knew exactly what she was looking for and approximately where something built on her architecture would need to live in order to function. There, she said. The file was named NL-FinArch-V 4.2. Anonymous. Version numbered. Metadata scrubbed to a creation date of 8 months ago. She opened it on the left side of the screen and opened the photograph of her original document on the right. The folded page, unfolded now and shot under the room's clean overhead light with Kenji's own phone. The logic was identical, not similar, not derivative in the way that ideas pass between people who work in the same field and read the same literature. Identical in the specific, unrepeatable way of a thing that had been lifted whole. The same notational shorthand, and the same three-tier waterfall structure, the same treatment of the R&D reserve account, the same month 18 reclassification trigger that she had designed as a theoretical stress test, and Dazai had apparently decided to use as the operational mechanism of an actual fraud. Kenji looked at both documents for a long time without speaking. Then he opened the due diligence folder. The report was 63 pages, thorough in appearance, signed off by 3 members of his internal advisory team. She read the relevant sections at the speed she always read, faster than most people were comfortable watching, and found the problem on page 41. The Nara Logistics subsidiary assessment had been written to satisfy scrutiny rather than to conduct it. The language was technically accurate and strategically incomplete. Whoever had written it knew what they were obscuring. She looked at the sign-off name at the bottom of the assessment. She looked at Kenji. He had already seen it. She could tell from the quality of his stillness. This was not the stillness of a man thinking. It was the stillness of a man absorbing something that was going to require considerable rearrangement of his understanding of the past 18 months. The name on the assessment belonged to someone who came to work in his building every morning. Someone he had trusted. She had not said his name out loud in 4 years. She had thought it. In the narrow room in Shimokitazawa, in the service corridor outside Table 1, in the particular silence of 3 in the morning when sleep became a theoretical concept, and the city outside her window offered no useful alternative. She had written it in documents that existed only on an encrypted drive she kept behind a loose panel beneath her bed. She had organized her entire life around it without once allowing it past her teeth, because saying it aloud in the wrong room to the wrong person was the one move that could end everything before it began. This room was the right room. This person had just watched his own due diligence report reveal a traitor on his payroll. Haruto Dazai, she said. Kenji's expression didn't change dramatically. It refined, the way a photograph refines when the lens finds its proper focus. He knew the name. Not intimately, but in the way that people who operate at a certain altitude know each other, by reputation, by the shape of their presence in a room, by the deals that were discussed, and the ones that quietly weren't. She watched him place Dazai in his mental geography and then begin, visibly, to reconsider the landscape around him. She told him what she knew. 3 deals in 6 years across 3 jurisdictions: Seoul, Singapore, Zurich. Each one structured around a credible, celebrated figure whose reputation provided the transaction with its cover. Each one collapsing at a point precisely calibrated to maximize the frontman's losses and minimize Dazai's exposure. Each time, Dazai had walked away with the extractable value already moved, already clean, already beyond reach. The frontmen had absorbed the wreckage. One had spent 14 months in litigation. One had not worked since. Kenji had been selected because he was not merely successful. He was trusted. His brand was integrity. 4 million subscribers who believed that what he said on camera was what he actually thought. That belief was the asset Dazai needed. Not the money, the credibility. A $500 million fraud wrapped in Kenji Sato's reputation would survive scrutiny that the same fraud wrapped in anyone else's name would not. She finished. The room held the information quietly. Kenji sat with it for what felt like a long time, but was probably 90 seconds. She did not fill the silence. She had learned, in the months of waiting, that silence was not wasted time. It was where decisions actually formed. Then he picked up his phone. He did not call his lawyer. He did not call his communications team. He called his head of security and told him, in a voice entirely emptied of the warmth he used for cameras, to locate Haruto Dazai's current position and not to lose it. While Aiko and Kenji sat on the 68th floor reconstructing the architecture of a fraud, the internet was doing what it does with moments of public rupture. It was taking the moment apart and distributing the pieces everywhere simultaneously, faster than any legal team or communications department could follow. The clip was 47 seconds. Someone had cut it cleanly. Kenji's gesture, the question, the silence. Then Aiko's voice delivering the subsidiary name and the collapse timeline with the unhurried precision of someone reading from a document only she could see. It had been captioned in Japanese within 11 minutes of the stream being cut. Mandarin and English versions followed within the hour. By midnight, it was on 5 platforms, and the view count had passed 2 million. By 2 a.m., it was at 8 million and accelerating, carried by the particular velocity reserved for videos in which someone powerful is publicly and irrevocably surprised. The narrative split almost immediately, as narratives do. One version saw a billionaire humiliated on his own broadcast, the god of growth, undermined by a waitress, his carefully managed brand of transparency turned against him in real time. This version was satisfying in the way of stories where the powerful are made briefly small, and it traveled fast among people who had always found Kenji Sato slightly too polished to be entirely trusted. The other version saw something else. A black woman in a red apron, standing in a room designed to make her invisible, refusing to be. Speaking with the authority of someone who had earned every word and waited 4 years to say them. This version traveled differently, quieter at first, then with gathering force, to shared between people who understood intuitively what it cost to know something true and have no platform large enough to make it matter. In London, in a flat in Clerkenwell, a man named Simon Okafor watched the clip 3 times. He had worked 2 desks away from Aiko at Meridian Capital. He had known, in the imprecise way of someone who notices things and chooses not to examine them too closely, that what happened to her had not been what the official account described. He had filed nothing, said nothing, made the calculation that most people make when the cost of speaking exceeds the discomfort of silence. He watched the clip a 4th time. Then he called a number he had not called in 4 years. Dazai's legal team issued a public statement at 3 a.m. It was 3 paragraphs of careful language designed to introduce doubt about Aiko's credibility and reframe her intervention as the act of a disgruntled former employee with a documented history of regulatory investigation. And it was precisely the wrong move, because it named her. And in naming her, it confirmed that Haruto Dazai knew exactly who she was, and had always known exactly what she could prove. By 6 a.m., Kenji had been presented with every available option and the cost of each. His legal team had worked through the night. His communications director had prepared materials. His board had convened at 5 in a video call that lasted 40 minutes and generated more heat than clarity. 14 people in separate locations, most of them frightened, all of them talking about brand and liability and the particular vulnerability of a public figure whose entire value proposition was trust. Heat, his CFO, had run preliminary numbers on the market exposure if the story continued to develop without a containing narrative. The numbers were not comfortable. Luca Ferrante had called 3 times. The 3rd call, Kenji had taken. Ferrante's position was simple and delivered without the warmth of their previous acquaintance. This needed to go away. Kenji had the resources to make it go away. And, if he chose instead to let a waitress with a regulatory history dismantle a $500 million transaction on the basis of a document no one had verified, then Ferrante would have no choice but to characterize Kenji's behavior as the destabilizing act of an unreliable partner. He had used the word consequences twice, both times in the measured tone of someone who considers it more effective than shouting. Kenji had listened. Then he had ended the call. His PR team placed 2 statements on the table in front of him. They had written both with professional thoroughness and no visible opinion about which he should choose. The first created distance, expressed concern about the disruption to the evening's broadcast, noted that all claims required independent verification, confirmed the company's commitment to rigorous due diligence, and made no reference to Aiko Tanaka by name. It was a document designed to give him room to move in any direction and commit to none. The second statement corroborated everything. He read them both twice. Then he set them down and sat for a while with the particular quality of silence that belongs to decisions already made, but not yet spoken. He thought about page 41 of his own due diligence report. He thought about the name signed at the bottom of an assessment written to obscure rather than examine. He thought about Seoul and Singapore and Zurich, and the men whose careers had been used as raw material and discarded. He thought about a woman who had folded a piece of paper into the pocket of a red apron and carried it through 11 months of invisibility, waiting for a room with enough witnesses. He picked up the second statement. He called his communications director and told her to release it at 7 before the markets opened. And then he called the financial services agency and asked for the fraud division. Haruto Dazai was arrested on a Tuesday at an airport with a boarding pass in his jacket pocket for a flight that was leaving in 40 minutes. He did not make the flight. The Nara logistics deal collapsed before it closed. No transfer completed, no investor capital moved, no losses beyond the operational costs of Dazai's network, which were absorbed by the fraud division's asset recovery process over the following months. The containment was clean in the way that only happens when the exposure occurs before the mechanism fully deploys. Aiko had timed it, she would later reflect, with more precision than she had consciously intended. Or perhaps she had intended it exactly. It was sometimes difficult, at 4 years' distance, to separate the plan from the instinct. Simon Okafor's testimony took 11 weeks to formally process and 3 minutes to matter. He had documented more than she knew, emails she hadn't seen, internal communications that established a timeline predating even her own records. Dazai's legal team, having already confirmed their client's awareness of Aiko in a 3 a.m. press statement read by 9 million people, found that their subsequent attempts to construct a credible alternative narrative were received with the enthusiasm generally reserved for documents no one is obliged to believe. And her name was cleared across 3 jurisdictions in the same month. The legal language was precise and thorough, and she read every word of it twice, alone, in the small office she had already begun renting in Minami Aoyama. Kenji called on a Wednesday. The offer was genuine, and the terms were extraordinary. Her own division, her own mandate, complete operational independence. She listened to the full proposal before she declined it, which she did without elaboration. He said he understood. She thought he probably did. He was, she had concluded, a better man than the one who had pointed at her across a dinner table, and she held both versions of him without needing to resolve the contradiction. Tanaka Risk Advisory opened the following month. The office was small. A desk, 2 client chairs, a wall of glass facing a quiet Minami Aoyama street. She had 1 employee, hired for their precision and their demonstrated comfort with silence. She had 3 clients within the first 6 weeks, all referred without solicitation. On the wall behind her desk, framed behind clean glass, was a single printed page, soft at the creases, time-stamped 14th of March 2020. Beside it, in English and Japanese, 1 sentence: she was always the most dangerous person in the room. She drank her coffee black. She checked everything twice. She arrived early and left when the work was finished, which was sometimes very late, and she did not mind that at all. She was for the first time in 4 years entirely and completely herself.